want to tell you about a conversation I had on my third date with my husband, Hugh. We were walking around the Chicago Botanic Gardens, one of our favorite places. I was already kind of falling for him by then, which made what I was about to say feel a little uncomfortable. I told him that as a single mom with no child support for most of the time, I had spent most of my adult life living check to check. I shared that money had never been super important to me, and I wasn't looking for a millionaire, but that I was done living the way I had been, wondering how I'd be able to fix my car if it needed more than the usual work, if going on vacation would be possible, and whether I'd always be one emergency away from a crisis. I needed to know if we were on the same page before I fell any harder, and I wanted to be honest about my own financial situation too, because it wasn't great, and I didn't want there to be any surprises later on. Now, here's the part I want to be honest about because it's a little embarrassing when I look back on it. I almost didn't give him a real chance. When I looked back at what he did for work, he was a mechanic at O'Hare Airport. I wasn't sure if we'd be on the same page financially. So I had that conversation on our third date while I was already falling for him. He didn't get defensive. He didn't make me feel calculating or unromantic. He didn't make me feel bad. He was actually glad I brought it up and said he wanted me to feel good about it. That conversation brought us much closer. And that moment told me something really important, not just about our finances, but about who he was as a person. Because a man who has done real work on himself doesn't get rattled by an honest conversation. He welcomes it. And I want you to notice that because that response, the ease of it, the lack of defensiveness, the genuine openness of a hard conversation, that doesn't happen by accident. That is what years of inner work looks like in a single moment. And that's what this video is about. Hugh's been sober for 37 years. He'll tell you himself that AA didn't just change his relationship with alcohol, it changed his relationship with himself when it comes to accountability and honesty and showing up. Years before I even met him, he went to therapy, specifically to work on anger, not because somebody made him, although a coworker did recommend it, but he wanted to be better because being a good person matters to him. It's just who he is. And what that looks like in real life, not in theory, but in our actual relationship, is this. About a week after we met in person for the first time, he told me he was going to call me at a certain time, and he was late. When he called, he didn't make any excuses or explain it away. He just owned it and apologized. Simply, directly, no drama. I actually had to ask him to repeat himself because I had never in my life heard a man do that before. When we disagree, which happens once in a while because we're two real people, he reflects afterwards. He thinks about what he could have done differently. And most of the time, he's the one who comes to me to talk it through and apologize. And even though I've done a lot of work too, he's better at that part of it than I am. It does make me want to be better though. And I will say, being with someone who has done a lot of work does raise your own standards. My husband is always open, transparent, and honest. It's something I never have to worry about. And it's even when honesty is uncomfortable. He listens to understand, not just to respond. He never makes me feel like my emotions are too much, even when I was going through menopause, which is when we met. That was great and fun. He's also really good at giving me what I need, whether it's someone to listen when I need to vent, or a hug when I need it, or space when I'm in need of some me time. He can read me better than anyone I've ever been with. Enough that sometimes I think he knows me better than I know myself sometimes, which is kind of crazy. Because the contrast matters, I want to remind you about the two men that I dated before Hugh. The first one was a military guy, disciplined, controlled, capable, but emotionally closed off. He didn't like talking about his feelings, any feelings really. and he didn't have a great relationship with his family. I invited him to a personal development seminar I was staffing, something that I really genuinely changed my life and that I was super passionate about. And he wouldn't even consider it. He also wouldn't go to a musical with me. And I love musicals, even though I did things that he loved. He wasn't growing, he wasn't interested in growing. And no amount of hoping or waiting was going to change that. Another guy I dated for 2 years, much earlier than the military guy, he actually did attend the personal development seminar, which I thought was a green flag. But it wasn't growth, it was a performance. He was always just telling me what I wanted to hear, and he lied about so many things. He had learned some of the tools, but none of his behavior changed. So here's what I learned from both of them and from everybody else I dated before my husband. Knowing the right words is not the same as doing the work. Attending one seminar or going to therapy for a few sessions isn't the same as being committed to growth. And a man who hasn't done real inner work will tell you he has because he believes it. But his patterns will always tell you the truth. Like I've said before, I'm a big believer in actions speak louder than words. So if you want to know how somebody feels about something, or you, watch their actions, not their words. I want to tell you something about this past year because I think it's the most honest proof I can give you of what it feels like to be with a man who has genuinely done the work. This past year, has been one of the hardest of my life. We moved to Florida. I left Chicago after 50 years, left my kids, my job, my family, everything familiar. I had both knees replaced 3 months apart and spent months in recovery. When I got to Florida, this was in November, I was out of work for 7 months while I looked for a job at the age of 60, which was quite humbling in ways that I was not prepared for. My parents are getting older, and watching that instead of being far away is something I'm getting used to. And I've been dealing with a painful estrangement from my oldest that I am still navigating. Through all of it, every single piece of it, Hugh has been my rock. Not because everything has been easy between us, not because I've been easy to be with through all of this. My emotions have been more up and down than probably ever before, maybe since menopause, probably since menopause. But he has never made me feel bad for any of it. He's never pulled back when things get heavy. He gives me whatever I need, whether it's listening, holding me, or giving me space, because he pays attention, because he knows me, because a man who's done real work on himself knows how to show up for somebody else without making it about him. That's not luck, it's evidence. So, how do you tell the difference between a man who has genuinely done the work and a man who has just learned to talk about it? And before I get any pushback from any men watching, this does go both ways. But here's what I've learned: real inner work shows up in accountability. How does he handle it when he's wrong? Does he own it without blaming and apologizing? Or does he explain and justify and make you feel like you caused it? A man who's done work on himself doesn't need to protect his ego at your expense. Real inner work shows up in how he talks about his past. Listen carefully when he's talking about his exes, his mistakes, the hard times in his life. Is there ownership and reflection, or is everybody else always the problem? A man who's genuinely healed can talk about it without bitterness and without blame. He can say that he wasn't ready, or he handled something badly, and that he learned from it. Real inner work shows up in patterns, not words. Anybody can say that they've changed. Anybody can use the language of therapy and growth. You need to watch what he does consistently over time. Patterns don't lie. Words are easy, but behavior, especially under pressure, especially when things get hard, is where the truth lives. And lastly, Real inner work shows up in his curiosity. A man who is genuinely committed to growth is curious about himself, about you, and about life. He asks questions, he listens to understand, and he's interested in being better, not just in being seen as a good person. And here's something I want you to sit with. Don't settle for potential. I see this too often. Women who stay with a man because of who he could be if he just went to therapy and did some work on himself, or he just changed whatever, fill in the blank. It is not your job to help him see what he doesn't yet see in himself. Watch who he already is. Potential is not a plan. I believe strongly that women over 50 need to ask important questions in the first 3 to 5 dates before more of your time and your heart are invested. So here are some of the ones that matter the most. How do you handle conflict? What does a disagreement actually look like with you? How do you talk about your past relationships? Listen for ownership versus blame. Are you open to personal growth, therapy, self-development, that kind of work? Are you in a place financially where we could build a comfortable life together? You don't have to ask it exactly like that, but find a way to get on the same page early. What are you actually looking for? Companionship or a real partnership? And what's your relationship like with your family? These questions aren't a test or an interview, so don't just fire them off one after the other. They're a conversation, and they're meant to be. And a man who's done real work on himself will welcome them, just the way my husband did on our third date. We are in week 7 out of 8, talking about green flags, and this one might be the most important one in the whole series. Pretty sure I've said that before, but it's because everything else we've talked about, emotional availability, communication, consistency, respect, character, partnership, all of it requires a man who's actually done the work to show up that way. It's really hard to build a healthy relationship with somebody who hasn't done any work at all on themselves. You can love them, you can hope for them, but you can't build with them. You deserve a man who's done the work, not a man with a good story about why he hasn't done it yet. So watch to see if his actions and his words line up. It will always tell you the truth. Hugh and I both say that if we had met even 6 months before we did, neither of us would have been ready for the relationship that we have. We were both doing the work separately at the same time. We were both becoming the person the other one needed. And that's not luck. That's preparation, meeting the right person at the right time. I am not just your coach, I'm your proof. If you'd like to get my newsletter, say yes in the comments and I'll take care of it. Plus, I'll send you my brand new guide called 5 Lies Women Over 50 Believe About Love and the truth that changes everything. If this video helps you, please subscribe. Every week on this channel, we talk about real love, real growth, and what actually it takes to create the relationship you deserve, because your best relationship starts with you. See you next time for the last video in the Green Flag series.